How's it going, guys? Welcome to another episode. Today I'm going to show you how to brew a peaches and cream ale. I'm going to show you step by step what I do and the process that it takes to brew beer from home. So the recipe for this cream ale calls for some crushed biscuit malt, lactose, corn sugar, Pilsen Light pure malt extract. Later on in the boil we'll be adding some Willamette hop pellets, and then once fermentation's ready to go, we're going to add this sulfate US-05 yeast. So today I'm joined by my friends Johnny and John, and before you ever start any homebrew session, it's always a good idea to have some great beer with great friends. So let's have some beer.
Cheers.
Cheers. Alright, so the first step is to fill up a giant 6-gallon pot with 2.5 gallons of water. Once that water gets up to about 155, 165 degrees, it's time to steep the grains. So today I got a really small grain bag, it's not a lot, and I only have to steep for about 20 minutes, but that is the first step. It's always important to check the temperature while your grains are steeping, because this optimum temperature of 155, 165 is going to extract the most sugars without harming your actual wort. So as you can see, we're sitting right at 160 degrees and the water has already changed color. Those grains are mixing in with the water and all the sugars are extracting. One thing I would recommend is to bounce around your grain bag every now and then. It's going to help move the water through all those grains to get the most flavor. But you never want to squeeze the bag. So while we're making beer, I enlisted the help of John and Johnny to help put labels on my homebrew. Now, who says that good work is hard to find? I think the secret is paying them in beer. So now that the grains have been steeping for 20 minutes, the next step is to sparge water on top of it. And by sparging, basically what that means is we're going to be pouring 170 degree water over on top of the grains back into the pot. That's going to ensure that we get any of those last little bits of the sugars out of those grains to get the best flavor possible. Alright, so here we go. Just going to pour this water right on top of the grain bag here. Usually you want to do it nice and slow. Get a little time to rest and drip through. I'll pour a little bit more in. And this is just making sure we get all that good stuff out of the grains. Alright, Johnny, so now that we finished sparging, what's the next step?
We're going to bring the wort to a boil now.
Time to boil it up. Alright, John, so what is the next step?
Okay, so the next step, we're actually going to add this corn sugar into here while Johnny's going to stir it for me, alright? So I'm going to go ahead and add it in now.
Now when you guys are mixing ingredients into the wort, you're going to want to make sure you pour nice and slow to avoid any backsplash. And the reason why you're stirring it in is you don't want it to stick to the bottom. Also make sure you turn off the heat so you don't burn the sugar at the bottom of the pot.
And so the next step, we're going to go ahead and add this lactose. So I'm going to add this lactose in here while Johnny just keeps stirring that in.
Alright, so the final thing that we're adding in this portion of the brew is a pure liquid malt extract. This liquid malt extract I heated up in the sink with hot water beforehand. Makes it easier to pour out because it's really thick like syrup, so you want to make sure that you heat it up first. And you can really see the thickness as I'm pouring this out. And while Johnny keeps stirring, this thing is almost empty, but we're not just going to throw it away. We're actually going to fill it up with some more hot water that we're going to mix in here to make sure we get all the malts that we can. It's going to ensure that we get the best flavor out of the beer. Okay, so now that I mixed some water in here, I really cleaned this out real well. You can see these malts are now running a little bit more clear. And I'll just show you up close real quick. The inside of that is basically cleaned out. That's going to ensure that we get all those malts out of there. Alright guys, now that we finished adding the malt and the sugars, we're bringing this wort right back up to a boil. So until that happens, let's have some more beer. So now we finally reached a rolling boil. And for this recipe, it's calling for some Willamette hops. We add this right at the beginning of the boil. We're just pouring it right in. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you're getting your wort up to a rolling boil, a lot of times you may actually get a boil over, which means that everything foams up and leaks out the top. You don't want that to happen. So when you're getting close to boiling temperature, you want to make sure that you're watching this very, very closely. As soon as it reaches that boiling temperature, just keep your hand on the heat so you can turn it down, turn it back up, so on and so forth, until you get it to a nice smooth rolling boil and you don't have to worry about any boil over. Alright, so now that we got that hops in there, we literally just have to wait 60 minutes. Once that's done, it's time to cool it down. Alright, so with just about 10 minutes left in the boil, it's time to drop in this wort chiller. This wort chiller is going to be used to cool down the wort later. We drop it inside the wort now while it's boiling to sanitize it. It is very important if you're using a wort chiller to make sure that the hoses are not touching anything on the stove. Otherwise you might melt them and then you have a problem. So I dropped the wort chiller in, we just got about 10 more minutes and then we're ready to cool this bad boy down. The boil's done. This right here is the yeast. I took the dry yeast out of the packet and sprinkled it into about 3/4 of a cup of water in a sanitized dish. That water was also boiled, so it was sanitized, and then I cooled it down to about 100 degrees. So this is gonna have some foil on top of it, sit for about 15 minutes. I stir it. The whole idea of this is it rehydrates the yeast. It wakes it up and gets it ready. So as soon as we pour it into the wort, it's ready to consume those sugars and convert it into alcohol. Alright, so now we've moved the wort from the stove to the sink. The wort chiller's all hooked up. I have it plugged into the sink head right here. We're going to run some cold water through that wort chiller. It's going to cool that wort down, and the goal is to get it to about 80 degrees. Once we do that, we're going to transfer it into the fermenter, where it's going to be staying there for about 2 weeks. And then we're actually going to add those peaches in there. I know you've probably been thinking, peaches and cream ale, where are the peaches? The peaches come during secondary fermentation, and I'll make sure I show you that later on in the video. Alright, so that wort chiller was fantastic. That's the first time I've ever used a wort chiller. It brought my wort down to 80 degrees in 10 minutes, maybe even less. Really awesome. It is an investment, but if you do decide to do home brewing, that should be the next thing on your list after buying your initial kit. At this point, Johnny here is going to actually pour the wort into the fermenter. Once it's in the fermenter, we're going to bring it up to 5 gallons, and then we're going to pitch the yeast. So go ahead and do your thing, Johnny. Alright, Johnny, so what are you doing now?
I am aerating the wort right now.
So basically what aerating the wort, what he means by that is he's exposing the wort to oxygen. During this time, right before fermentation, exposing the wort to oxygen is actually a good thing because it enhances the flavors of the beer. Alright guys, so this is the last major part of the brewing process and the most important. This is where we mix the hydrated yeast in with the wort. Now the reason why this is so important is the yeast is the catalyst for everything that turns wort into beer. As of right now, the wort is literally just sugars and flavoring. But once we add the yeast is actually going to eat those sugars and convert it into two things, alcohol and CO2. The alcohol is what we're looking for. That's what turns this into beer. But here we go. Now you want to make sure that you get as much of that yeast as possible, because the more live yeast you have in your wort, the better your beer is going to taste. This is the airlock. This is what's going to help the CO2 escape without anything getting in. We want the CO2 to escape because if not, it's like shaking up a Coca-Cola bottle and letting it explode. We don't want that. We want that CO2 out, want the alcohol in. We'll need the CO2 when it comes time to bottle, but we're ready to make some beer. What's up guys, we are back. Now it's been about 10 days since we made the wort for our peaches and cream ale. Now comes the time that we move everything into the secondary fermenter with the peaches. Alright, so as you guys can see here, I have peaches all ready to go in the secondary. This is about 6 pounds of peaches. Since they're not in season, I did have to buy them frozen. I put them in grain bags to make sure that it doesn't make the beer really cloudy. And then on top of that, I ended up going with frozen peaches. Worst case scenario, I do have some peach extract if this doesn't produce enough flavor in the beer, but we'll find out about that in about 2 weeks. Alright guys, so here's a primary fermenter. We now have a siphon started that's running a hose all the way down into this secondary right on top of the peaches. Now I will say, I am quite surprised. I did expect this beer to run through the hose a little bit clearer for being a cream ale, but one thing I forgot to add was Irish moss. Irish moss will help your beer become more clear, but you have to add it during the boil. Now mistakes happen. This isn't going to harm the flavor of the beer. It just is probably going to give it a little bit more of a cloudy texture, which regardless is pretty common with home brews anyways. So there you have it. The beer has now been moved into the secondary fermenter, and now we just gotta wait another week or two and this bad boy will be ready for bottling. Alright guys, this beer is now in the secondary. Now one thing I wanted to bring up again was the idea of using extract. I purchased this extract with the intention of actually using it with this peaches and cream ale. The problem is I've witnessed in the past, and I've read a lot online, that these extract flavors can often taste like extract flavors. Who doesn't love a beer that has true natural flavors? So I'm gonna try my best. I'm really hoping that 6 pounds of peaches will be enough to bring out that delicious peaches and cream flavor. If it's not, I do have this as a backup plan. I haven't decided whether or not I want to use it, but I'll find out in a couple weeks. Alright guys, well thanks for watching us brew this beer. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time on Let's Have Some Beer. Cheers. Come on, John. Oh.